Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by Yisrael and Masha Rotman in loving memory of Masha's grandfather, Jacob Maltz, Yaakov Yitzchak ben Moshe Aaron Zatzal, on his 65th yahrzeit, which was last Thursday. Although my Zaidi died when I was still a child, I was inspired by the stories of his sacrifices to stay religious at a time when many were leaving the fold. I still remember his smile, radiant with warmth and love. Today's daf is sponsored by Cliff and Minna Felig in honor of Michelle and Seth Farber on the occasion of their daughter Chani's marriage in the throes of our war with Iran. Thank you. Okay, we are going to get started on our learning for today. So what we saw in yesterday's daf was this 3 days before. We already saw that from the first Mishna. We can't do business dealings with Gentiles. All different kinds of business dealings. We're going to get into different details of the Mishnah today. So what we were dealing with yesterday was the issue of the 3 days. Why specifically three? And then we said, why not one? Doesn't it take just one day to prepare food? And we saw that from our sources about our preparation of food for the holiday, to which we said the distinction between sacrifices of animals. There you need more preparation because of blemishes, but not too many more because the blemishes for Gentiles are not like the blemishes for Jewish sacrifices, because blemishes, and that's what we were up to, blemishes of Gentiles are really only if there's a limb that's broken, okay, and not the dukin shaba'ayin, which was this unique type of mum, right, which was a mild kind of mum, if you remember, by the way, but it is a blemish that apostles sacrifice. It comes up in the Kamsa Bar Kamsa story. Now, then the Gemara had said, where do we get that the Gentiles can't bring Avram Nechai? And that was learned out from the story of the Teva and Noach. When Noach went into the ark, he brought in animals, mikol hachai, mikol basal. Now that was a redundant phrase. Why from all live animals, from all the basar, those who have flesh? So they said from there we learned that it has to be alive, meaning all its limbs are intact. Now that means, so now you have to make a jump here. The Ben Noach or Noach, well, why was he bringing animals into the Teva? Today we're going to see a few different reasons, but one of them was in order to have sacrifices, to be able to have sacrifices after. So they had to be animals that were complete in their limbs because B'nai Noach can't bring sacrifices to God unless they're complete in their limbs. From there, we kind of make a jump. Gemara even doesn't say this, but it's an obvious under the radar jump, which is that means that Gentiles also, or idol worshippers, would not also, if Ben Noach is commanded, if when they bring sacrifices to God, the idol worshippers won't bring for their idols unless it has all its limbs intact. And that's why they need 3 days, and not more than 3 days, but also not less than 3 days. Okay, then we said, but how do you know Mikol Chai is coming to teach you about complete limbs? Maybe it's coming to teach you not a treifa, an animal that might die that's expected to die within 12 months. So that we get from the words lechayot zera, which was another pasuk that describes, also from the Ofa Shamayim, they took 7, zachar and nekeva, lechayot zera, in order to propagate, so that there would be animals to breed other animals or birds to breed other birds, which is the second reason why there were animals in the Teva, right? One was for sacrifices, one was to be able to have creatures in the world once the whole world is destroyed. So they said, right, l'chayot zera, to have offspring, that would exclude a treifa, to which the Gemara had said, and this is where we left off, the very end of Hamud Bet, hani chalaman damar treifa ina yoled. That makes sense if you say a treifa can't give birth, then l'chayot zera teaches you about a treifa. But elaman damar treifa yoled ma'yichal amemer. But if you say a treifa can give birth, because it's going to die within 12 months, doesn't mean it can't have offspring. So how else are we going to explain where do you exclude a treifa? It can't then be excluded necessarily from the chayot zera. Amar kra itach b'domim lach. Okay, this is when Noach is told from all the animals that are mikol achai, mikol basar, the one pasuk we read before, shnai mikol tavi teva lachayot itach, to live with you. What does it mean with you? Like you. Okay, that with you means like you, and then we're going to say bidomim lach. Okay, like you. Bidoma Noach gufe treifa hava. But wait, maybe Noach himself was a treifa, and then bidomim lach, they could be like Noach, and they could be treifot. How do you know Noach wasn't a treifa? So they say, we'll prove Noach wasn't a treifa. He wasn't going to die within 12 months. Tamim k'tive, it says he was complete. Now, tamim often comes the opposite of blemish, right? He was perfect. Now, usually we say, when we said that Noach was tamim, you mean he was kind of straight in the ways of God, was complete in his in his midot, okay, his characteristics. But right now they're suggesting maybe tamim means that he wasn't a treifa. But maybe it means tamim in his ways. And again, we're talking about midot, his good qualities. Tzaddik tibet, or he says he was a tzaddik. You don't need tamim and tzaddik to say the same thing. Well, no, maybe they each mean two different things, but again, having nothing to do with his physical, but more his spiritual. Dilma tamim b'drachav, tzaddik b'maasav. Tamim is more in his attributes, and tzaddik in his actions. You could be right. Usually those things go together, but maybe each one is defining a different element. So now they're going to say, fine. So you can't prove he wasn't a treifa from there. Again, we want to call it. We could prove if we could prove Noach was not a treifa. Then bedomim lach would be our proof for how we know it's not a treifa, and then we wouldn't need the pasuk b'chol chai to teach us umikol chai to teach us treifa, and that would be free to teach us the complete limb. Okay, that all its limbs are complete. So now, lo sakdatach to Noach gufei treifa. Well, actually, it's counterintuitive to think Noach would have been a treifa. To isakdatach Noach treifa, because if he was a treifa, then the drasha of itach b'domim lach would make absolutely no sense. Because Amar le'rachman kavatech al shleimim lo ta'al, God is saying, I want animals like you are, which is a treifa. Why would God want specifically animals that are going to die within 12 months? That would make no sense. So therefore, from the fact that we have this drasha, like Noach, it must mean Noach wasn't a treifa. Okay, it's a bit of an interesting circular, a bit kind of proof. Now they say, okay, now if we go back, we also learned the treifa from l'chayot zera, according to some. So hashad nafkalim itach l'chayot zera lamali. So why do we need l'chayot zera for? According to those who thought that a treifa can't give birth, that would exclude the treifa also. So why do we need two psukim to exclude the treifa? Well, imi itach havamina letzavta be'alma. If you had me itach, I would have thought that the purpose of the animals was lachayot itach, it says, for the animals to be with Noach. And then we would think maybe Noach just needed them for company on the teva, or for company in the world after. But that would mean afilu zaken, afilu saris. Even an elderly animal, right? An animal that can't give birth anymore, or an animal that's a saris, that's castrated and can't have offspring. Therefore, katav rachman zera. In other words, the animals, that now we have three possible purposes for the animals. The last one we mentioned is maybe just to have company with Noach and the teva. But no, maybe that is part of the reason. But we also need to be able to have children after, so that the world will continue, and to be able to bring sacrifices after, and therefore they need to have complete limbs. And that's what we learned from all the different psukim. Now we move on to another question about the Mishna. Ibayelu. Shlosha yamim hem ve'edehen. It said 3 days before the holiday. When it says 3 days before the holiday, does it mean literally 3 days before the holiday? Or does it mean 3 days including the day of the holiday? 3 days altogether? Because the assumption is if you can't sell to them 3 days before their holiday, you obviously can't sell to them on their holiday. So the fact that Mishna is only mentioning the days before, maybe the days before include the days of the holiday. Or is the Mishna just talking about the days before? And obviously, in addition, you can't have the days of the holiday. So really the question is it 3 days altogether, or is it 2 days before, is it 3 days altogether, which would mean 2 days before the holiday, 1 day of the holiday, or is it actually 4 days? It's 3 days before and the holiday itself. So now you can look at the study guide today. It starts from here and charts out what we're going to do in the next section, which is 4 different sources to try to come to an answer. And all the sources are really trying to say, it seems like it's really the 3 days in addition to the days of the holiday, but the first 3 sources we're going to reject. Only the third one is going to provide definitive proof that that is in fact what it means. 3 days before the holiday, not including the holiday, which would mean altogether 4 days. So shlosha yamim hem be'edehen or dilma hem be'lo edehen. Is it them with the holiday or maybe them in addition, right, without the holiday? Tashma, let's learn from here. Now we're going to learn a different approach, which is going to be in this source and in the next, which is Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael had a different approach. Our Mishnah only talked about days before the holiday. Rabbi Yishmael omer, shlosha lefnehem v'shlosha la'acharihen asul. 3 before and 3 after are forbidden. Now, isa kadata chem be'edehen. If you think the 3 includes the holiday itself, Rabbi Yishmael, Yomi den chashavlu meikara v'chashavlu levasof, doesn't make sense that you'd say 3 before including the holiday and 3 after including the holiday. That counts the holiday twice. That would make no sense. It must mean 3 before, 3 after, plus the holiday, 7 altogether. So they say, not necessarily. I did the Tana Shlosha Lifnehem, Tana Nami Shlosha Lacharehem. No, really, when it said 3 before, I meant 3 before, including the holiday. And then it could have just said in 2 after, but since it said 3 before, it said 3 after just to match the language. But really, the 3 after includes the holiday as well. Okay, second attempt. Tashma, the Amar of Tachli Farber Avdimi Amar Shmuel. Yom Aleph, or you might have a different girsa, which says Yom Notzlim, which is Sunday of the Gentiles, right? Sunday of the Christians. That the Sunday is the Christians' day, their holiday. Every week they have a holiday. So let's do the math according to Rabbi Yishmael. So the source, so Shmuel says, L'divrei Rabbi Yishmael la'olam asur. According to Rabbi Yishmael, you can never do business with the Christians because what happens? 3 days before Sunday are forbidden, 3 days after Sunday are forbidden, plus Sunday, that's 7 days, that's all the days of the week. Now, if you said the 3 days includes the holiday, right? Sunday has 2 days before, Friday and Saturday, 2 days after, Monday and Tuesday, that would leave Wednesday and Thursday free. So you wouldn't be able to say it's always forbidden, you would have Wednesday and Thursday. So that didn't work. So I'm sorry. So that works to prove it includes, right, that it doesn't include the days of the holiday. So now we're going to say no. We weren't asking the question according to Rabbi Yishmael. You could say clearly Rabbi Yishmael thought, and we just saw from that source, that it's the 3 days in addition to the day of the holiday. But I wanted to know what the rabbis think. In other words, do the rabbis disagree about Rabbi Yishmael about one point, which is only before, not after, but they agree that the 3 doesn't include the holiday? Or do they disagree about both points and think, number one, it's not after, it's only before. And number 2, it doesn't include the day, it does include the day of the holidays against Rabbi Yishmael. So that doesn't prove anything. Amar Ravina, third attempt. Tashma ve'eluhen edehen shel v'dei kochavim, kalenda, Saturnia, b'kratisim. Okay, this is a Mishna later we're going to see, which says these are the holidays. And then they explain. Amar Rav Chanim bar Rava. Chanim bar Rava explains, kalenda is shmona yamim achar tkufa, and Saturnia is shmona yamim lifnei tkufa. There's the winter equinox, or I think it's called the equinox. It's on December 22nd or December 21st when it becomes winter. So now that's called the Tkufa. So Kalenda is an 8-day holiday after the Tkufa, and Saturnia is an 8-day holiday before the Tkufa. So far, we don't yet know where we're going. V'simanech achor v'kedem tzartani. Now, if you want to remember this, Rav Chanin said this, just a total aside. You want to remember which one? Well, the Mishnah mentioned first Kalenda and then Saturnia. You want to remember which comes after the equinox and which comes before? Well, the way you remember is Achor Bakedem Tzartani. It's a pasuk in Tehillim, and I think it's Tehillim. Yeah, it's Tehillim, and it's the Achor after comes before the before, and that's the first one is the first one mentioned in the Mishnah is the one that comes after the equinox, and the other one is the one that comes before. Okay, now what's the point though? Well, notice this is an 8-day holiday. What did our Mishnah say? 3 days before. Now, if 3 days include the holiday, then it would be 2 days before, and then all the 8 days of the holiday. So, if the 3 days before actually includes the holiday days, this holiday would actually have 10 days altogether, and not 3 days altogether, because it would be 2 plus the holiday, which is 8. So therefore, that seems to prove it's the 3 days before the holiday and not including the days of the holiday. To which they say, no, it doesn't mean anything. When they said 3 days before, which includes also the day, right, 2 before 1 of the holiday, the Tana there, kule kalenda chad yom uchashivla. They just counted kalenda, the whole 8 days of holiday, as if it was 1 day for the purposes of the 3 days. It's 3 days plus the holiday, however many days the holiday would be. 3 days including the day of the holiday, but meaning 2 before plus how many days the holiday is, and therefore you can't prove anything from there. However, finally, we're going to get to the fourth and final proof where they're really going to come to an answer and conclude what they've been trying to conclude all along, which I guess they intuited that was the answer, but now they finally get it. Am Rav Ashi Tashma, let's learn from here, from where our Mishnah. Lifnei dehen shel avdei kochavim shlosha yamim. Listen to the language. before the holiday of the Gentiles 3 days. That sounds pretty clear. It's before, 3 days before. If it was them including the days of the holiday, it should have just said it would have said the holidays of the Gentiles for 3 days, and then you'd understand 1 day of the holiday, assuming it was a 1 day holiday, and 2 days before. You might say, look, there was a machloket, Rabbi Yishmael and our Tanakama, about whether it's before and after or just before. So maybe that's why they need to say before, so that you didn't confuse it and think that the Mishnah was like Rabbi Yishmael and said after. And that's why it couldn't have just said the holiday of the Gentiles 3 days. You might have thought 3 days after, or 1 day before, 1 day after, 1 day in between or something. So they say, no, if you wanted to do that, you would have said the holidays of the Gentiles 3 days before, and then you would think maybe that meant the holidays, including the days before, altogether 3. But the fact that our Mishnah says and words it as before the holidays, it's 3 days, that seems pretty clear that it's before the holidays, 3 days. It sounds like the 3 days is non-including the day of the holiday, period. End of sugya. Next question. Now, we made mention of this sugya when we first started the Masechet. This is really the big central question, and fascinating that the Gemara doesn't even try to bring an answer. Okay, they really didn't know, it seems. Okay, there are 2 possible reasons why this would be forbidden to do business dealings with them before their holidays. Is it mishum harvacha, because it will be good for them, and because they'll be happy, they'll go thank their gods and bring sacrifices to their gods. Right now, we're going to see later, it seems like with either the money or the animal that we sold them. Okay, and or dilma mishum l'fnei iver. Oh, and then, by the way, what's the prohibition? The prohibition comes from Shmot Yud Gimel, okay, where the pasuk says there. I'll open it up. Pasuk says here, Shmot chapter 23, verse 13. Whatever I tell you to do, you should observe. Don't mention the name of other gods. Lo yishama al picha. This is the key. It shall not be heard on your mouth. Now, not be heard on your mouth. Why don't you just say you can't say it? Means here that you can't cause it to be mentioned, and then it would be as if you mentioned it. So that's the concern with harvacha, that they're going to go thank their gods with your help, basically, because you caused them to thank their gods. So it's as if you did it directly, even though it was indirect. The second option is mishum lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. Don't put a stumbling block before a blind person, which is understood to mean much more than that, which is don't enable somebody else to do, don't make it easy for someone else to do something forbidden. Now, it's forbidden for B'nai Noach, for any Gentiles, to worship idols. So if you do something that's going to enable them to worship idols, then you've transgressed the prohibition of putting a stumbling block for a blind person. So those are the 2 possibilities. Now, the Gemara wants to know, l'may nafkamina. If your Hebrew is good, on Beyond the Daf, on the Hebrew side of our site, Rav Tubal Kahana gave a shiur on specifically this topic of lifnei iver and what are all the ramifications, halachic kind of overview of where, what, like inviting people for Shabbat who might drive on Shabbat. How do we view that? Or different things of where lifnei iver lo titei mechshol would apply. Okay, and how one can, or is that, for example, lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. Anyway, it's a very interesting topic. So now they say, l'may nafkamina. What's the difference whether we say it's mishum harvacha or it's mishum lifnei iver lo titei mechshol? What if the Gentile already had an animal to sacrifice? It was planning to anyway sacrifice it. And then you sold the Gentile animal or gave the Gentile money with which they could buy another animal. So if it's that they're just going to be so happy that you gave them more and plentiful and they'll go thank their gods, that's going to happen anyway. But if it's putting a stumbling block before this Gentile, this idol worshiper already had one. Okay, and therefore, once they already have it, and they're already going to use it for sacrificing, you didn't really enable them to do, you didn't cause them to stumble anymore because they were already going to do it anyway. So now they say, wait a minute. Wait, if they already have an animal, that's not lifnei ver. If you hand them one, even if they already have one, sounds like from a different sugi, you would be transgressing this lifnei ver lo titei mechshol. How do we know? V'hatanya, it says in a Braita, Amar Rabbi Natan, Minayin shelo yoshit, we're now turning to Amud Bed. How do you know that you can't pass Adam kos shel yayin lenazir? You can't pass a nazir a cup of wine because it will be very tempting for them to want to drink the wine. You're enabling them to drink the wine. That's lifnei ver, or Eber min achai lebnei Noach, or a Gentile who's not allowed to eat a limb broken off of a live body of an animal, and you give them that limb to eat. How do you know you're over on lifnei ver? You shouldn't do that. Talmud lomar, but lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. It's not how do you know you're over on, it's how do you know you shouldn't do this? Because it says lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. You're basically sticking something in their face that's forbidden to them, and they might come to eat. Now, now in those cases, if you pass the glass of wine, what, they couldn't have found the wine on their own? Sounds like it was at the table and you just passed it to them. They would have found it anyway, right? So same So same thing by us. Just because they had the animal, you're putting an animal in their face. You sold them an animal. You sold money, they could buy an animal. Even though they have another animal, you're basically making it very easy for them to do the sin. So wouldn't that be forbidden based on this source? So they say no. You misunderstood the source about the Nazir and the Eber min achai of the Ben Noach. The case is when you pass them the glass of wine, it's not like you're sitting at the table and you pass the wine, or you pass the limb from the animal. It's that you're on two sides of the river and you have the wine or the limb of the animal and you pass it over the river to the person. They couldn't have gotten it without you passing it. So that would be lifnei ver. But if you can't reach it, then yeah, that is a nafkamina between lifnei ver. If they could have gotten it on their own or they had another animal, it wouldn't be your fault for doing it and you wouldn't be actually transgressing. And then you'd only transgress it if we said it's mishum harbacha, but not if we said it's mishum lifnei ver lo titei mechshol. Okay, and daikanami, and we can even further prove that Braita that we quoted about passing the wine or passing the Ever min achai was from two sides of the river. Dekatani lo yoshit, velo katani lo yitain. Shmamina. This you have to know Hebrew better. Lo yoshit is to pass, and lo yitain is to give. To give is kind of like, it's hard to say to pass, but lo sheet is like to stretch your arm and give it to someone or something like that. So it's more of a situation. Why didn't they just use a simple don't give? Because giving is not the issue. It's taking it from a place where they couldn't access it and making it accessible to them. And that's the only case when you'll be forbidden. Okay, and that's why the Shiur and Sugya Tanav, Dr. Merav Tupakana is about this. Like, what exactly makes you transgress this prohibition of lifnei ver? What are the halachic criteria that need to be there in order for it to happen? Okay, Ibayla. Next question. We have a series of questions today. Nasav. What if you did sell to the Gentile 3 days before their holiday to this idol worshiper? What's the status of either the money you got in the sale or the item that you got from buying from them? Is it forbidden to benefit from? Rabbi Yochanan amar nasav natan asul. Rish Lakish amar nasav natan mutal. So machloka Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says no way, no how, you can't benefit at all. Rish Lakish says you can. So we're going to have two versions of a difficulty here. The same source is brought. In version 1, it's brought by Rabbi Yochanan against Rish Lakish. In version 2, it's brought by Rish Lakish against Rabbi Yochanan. And you'll see in a minute how this works. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. He throws this source as a difficulty. Edehen shel avdei kochavim, which is on the holidays of the Gentiles. Nasav natan asulin. If you do business dealings, any business dealings you do are forbidden to benefit from. So my lav lifnei edehem, when it says the holidays, doesn't it mean before the holidays? To which Rish Lakish answers, lo, edehen dafka. No, that source means on the holiday. Now we learn that on the holiday and before the holiday, it's a different halacha. If you do business on the holiday, everyone agrees it's forbidden to benefit. If you do it before the holiday, Rish Lakish says it's permitted to benefit from, the Rabbi Yochanan says it's not. And that's how each one reads that source differently. Ikeda Amre, the second version of this sugya, is that actually Eitive Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish le Rabbi Yochanan. The Rish Lakish brought this as a difficulty against Rabbi Yochanan because he said, look, it says Edehen shel avdei kochavim nasav natan asul. which would imply specifically only on the holidays. It's the same exact source. It's just according to the conclusion of the previous sugya, that's where we start in the next sugya, right? In this version. Look at the wording. It says on the holiday it's forbidden, but that seems to imply if you did it before the holiday, it wouldn't be forbidden. To which they answer, Tana Idi, right again, Rabbi Yochanan's going to answer, Tana Idi v'Idi, Edehen Karile. No, the Tana called the days before the holiday the same thing, and just Edehen means around the time of the holidays, whether it's on the holiday or before the holidays, any business dealings you do, they're forbidden to benefit from. So that sugya, right, kind of went either way. We brought the same source. In one is difficulty of Rabbi Yochanan on Rish Lakish, and the other is difficulty of Rish Lakish on Rabbi Yochanan. Either which way, they each answer the difficulty on that. But the bright source ends with the Tanya Kavatei de Rish Lakish. Kishamru asur lateti mahen lo asur ela b'davar mitkayem, aval davar she'eno mitkayem lo. So when they said it's forbidden to do business dealings with them, they only forbade something that will still be there in the next few days, something that stays. Okay, as opposed to Rashi says, let's say a vegetable, which can rot in 2-3 days. Okay, they didn't have refrigerators either. So depending on what kind of vegetable he's talking about, right? Some obviously can last for a while, but many of them don't last for very long. So the only thing they forbade to do business dealings is something that can last. Okay, they didn't forbid things that don't last very long because there's not that much benefit from something like that. And therefore, it's not like they're going to be so happy they're going to thank their gods. But something more serious, you buy an animal, you buy, something more of import. Here is the key about Rish Lakish. It says, even if it's davar mitkayem, which is forbidden, that will last, if you did it, though, you can benefit from it. Okay, if you did do a sale, business interaction with that. So now we have this source that proves Rish Lakish, which would then, you would think, the commentaries would hold like Rish Lakish. And in fact, the Sephardi commentaries, for the most part, hold like Rish Lakish. Tosfot actually says, no, we don't hold like Rish Lakish, because in general, we have a rule that generally when Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish disagree, we hold like Rabbi Yochanan. And there's a few unique cases listed in a sugya in Yevamot, if I remember correctly, right, in Yevamot and Daf Lamed Vav, about sugya where we hold specifically like Rish Lakish, and this is not mentioned there, and therefore Tosfot doesn't think, even though the sugya seems to side on Rish Lakish's side, because until that there was difficulty on each, and that was evened out. But the bright supports Rish Lakish. Tosfot doesn't think we hold like Rish Lakish in this area. So I just want to point out, we have these two questions in the last two sections, right? This question, which it's unclear exactly how we paskin. This is machloka between the commentaries. And then the previous one about whether it's Mishum Arbacha or Lifnei Iver, we didn't even try to bring an answer, and the Gemara has no answer, and it's also left kind of up in the air about how we hold. Again, the nafkamina being if, is it forbidden if the person has another animal, if the Gentile already has an animal. Okay, then we're going to end this section with Tani Rav Zvi, B'dbei Rabbi Yoshaya. Rav Zvi brought a braita from the school of Rabbi Yoshaya. Davar she'ein mitkayem mochrim lahem, aval ein lokchim mehem. If it doesn't last, so we just said, according to this other source, that you could do business dealings with them, but he says you can sell to them something that doesn't last because that's not so exciting for them. They're not going to go thank their gods. But you can't buy from them because buying from them is actually a huge help. If it's not going to last very long, then they want to get rid of it as quickly as possible and make money off of it. If you don't buy it from them, they're going to throw it in the garbage, right? Like all these fruits and vegetables in the fruit store that just get left over. They end up getting thrown away. So they really want to get rid of that stuff. You're actually doing them a big favor. And then they would thank their gods. Now we get to a story. Haumina, there was a heretic, to Shador le dinare kesarna. Okay, he sent a Caesarean dinar, it's a type of coin, le Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya b'yom Edo. So on the heretic's holiday, he sent this coin to Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. Havayat of Rish Lakish kameh. Rish Lakish was right there. Amar, so Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya said to Rish Lakish, hey chiyave, what should I do? Eshkale azilumode. If I take it, the guy will be so appreciative that I accepted his gift and he'll thank his gods. Lo eshkale, if I don't take it, havile eva, he'll be so angry at me, who knows what he'll do to me. He could get me killed, for all I know. So Amalei Rish Lakish, tol uzroko tol lebor bifanav. Take it, accept the gift, but throw it in the pit in front of him. So he sees that you're not accepting it. Okay, that's a little bit weird. You accept it, but don't accept it And Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya says back to him, this is a ridiculous answer. Amar koshken dehavileva. If I accept the gift and throw it into a pit, he'll for sure be angry with me. It's like there's nothing more insulting than taking a gift and throwing it in a pit. If I return it, right, that's better. At least the person has their item. If I throw it in the garbage, and make it lost forever because I threw it in a pit, no way, no how. So Rish Lakish explains, no, you didn't understand. Kila achar yadhu dekamina. What I meant is accept it. So he sees you accept his gift, he'll be happy. But then you're going to immediately accidentally drop it in the bore, make it look like it's accidentally. Drop it in the bore. He'll see that it went into the bore. So he'll see that in the end you didn't get the gift. So he won't be that happy because in the end his gift went nowhere. And he won't think you did it on purpose, so he won't be angry with you. And that's the way to resolve what to do with it. Okay, next. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had listed 4 things that you can't do. One was masal matan. Now that clearly goes in both directions because it's good for each side to sell an item, get money, or buy an item and have the item. But now we have to go through all the next cases. The next one is lahashilanu l'sh'ol mehen, to lend to them or to borrow from them. So bishlam lahashilan kamrivachlu. If you lend them something, obviously it's good for them. They now have something they didn't have before and use of it. Aval lish'ol mehen, but to borrow something from them, they now don't have that item in their possession. It's worse for them. So we're going to have, for all these, all other 3 cases in the Mishnah, we're going to do the same thing with one of, right, because they go in both directions. And one is going to be definitely beneficial. The other one's not really going to be so beneficial. And each time we're going to have Abaye and Rabbi each give different answers, but they're going to be consistent in their answers, you'll see. So Abaye says, Amar Abaye, Gzera l'sh'ol mehen atu lashilan. It's a Gzera. We don't allow you to borrow from them because if we allow you to borrow, maybe you'll be, to let them to borrow from them is forbidden, even though it's really bad for them, because we don't want you to think that they can borrow from you, okay, that you can lend them things. Rabba Amar, Kula Mishum de'azilu modehu. What do you mean? For them to lend something to you is actually good for them because they feel like they did something nice for you, just like we had the giving the gift before. And they will thank their gods for that you borrowed an item from them. That in the end is a benefit. We're going to do the same thing with Lahavotam, Levot Mehem. Then after we do the same thing with all, then we're going to have to say, so why did you need all these cases? You could have learned one from the other, and we'll explain why you couldn't have. Lahavotam Ulevot Mehem, to loan them money and to borrow from them. Bishlama Lahavotan, I understand to loan them money, Mishum de Kamir Bachlu, because now they have money to use. Ella Levot Mehem Amai, but why borrowing from them? They're out of money right now. Amar Bai, Gzera Levot Mehem Atu Lavotam. They forbid borrowing from them because maybe then you'll think it's okay to lend to them, to loan them money. Rava Amar, Kula Mishum de'azilu modehu. Again, Rava says, they both say the same thing as before. It's because in the end, for them to loan you money, it's also good for them. They enjoy the fact that they've loaned you money. First of all, they might be able to loan you on interest, and also just they've done something good for you. Whenever you do a favor to someone, they also owe you. So there's also that element to it. Lifar'anu lifra mehem. So again, to pay them back a loan and to collect a loan from them. Now, this already we saw in the Mishnah, there was a machloket, but we're within Tanakama who thinks that it's actually, right? Now, we said it's good for him in the end. That's what we said the Tanakama holds. So, Bishlam Foran Mishum de Kamer Bachlu. If you pay them back, obviously it's good for them. But if you collect from them, it's actually bad for them. So, Amr Bai Gzera Leframihan Atu Lefaran. Collecting from them is really only forbidden because you might think it's okay for them to collect from you. Rav Amar Kula Mishum de'azilu modehu. Rav says, no, in the end, they're thankful that that they pay back a loan. They're appreciative of that. Utsrichi. Now, why do we need all these cases? If you said just the first case in the Mishnah, this one we didn't even bring up in this section. But if you had doing business dealings, you would say, Mishum de Kamir Bachluhu Azilu Modeh, because in the end he benefits. Either sold an item, right, and got money for it. So even though he didn't get an item, he did get money for it. But when you borrow something from them, you're actually depleting their supply of items, right? They have less than they had before. Now, if you just added that case, you'd say Mishum de Chashiva Le Milta Azilu Modeh. That's significant for him that he was able to loan you something. And also, they're going to get it back because it's a physical item. But But if they loan you money, it's just a pain in the neck for them because they might not ever get the money back. They might say, oh, I'll unlikely see that money, right? Sometimes you loan money and you have no idea whether you'll ever see that money again, right? Whereas opposed to if it's an item that the person borrowed, they'll clearly return the item. It's the milveh, as we said many times, if someone borrows money, they use the money, and then they might not have it back, and they might not be able to return it. So let's say you have a samatan because that obviously is beneficial to both sides. You have the sh'ol because again, there's some benefit there and they know they'll get it back. You have levot because even though they might not get it back, still we say that. But you could say, if you just had that case, you would have said, right, that in addition to the other two, mishum de ka'ama bar korche mi parana, because maybe the Gentile said, look, I'm going to find a way to get my money back. And therefore he'll be thankful that he gave you money and again did you this favor. Is viewed as a good thing and he knows for sure he'll get his money back. But to return a loan where the Gentile knows they're not getting anything back in return, maybe that you might say that would be painful, and that's really what Rabbi Yehuda says. It's just a pain for them, right? And maybe Tanakama wouldn't hold that. But sricha, that's why the Mishna tell you, even in that case, it's still beneficial because they got rid of a big burden off their shoulders. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Nifra'im Mehem. Now we're going to go to Rabbi Yehuda, and then we're going to find out there's a third shita. So Rabbi Yehuda said, you can, right? He said, you can take back a loan from them because it's just a pain, right? They don't want to get back their loans. They were maybe never planning to. We're going to talk about this soon. Okay, so now they're going to say, right? Are you happy you got this loan off your back? Why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda agree with what Tanakama says? And in fact, Rabbi Yehuda somewhere else seems to go by this because Rabbi Yehuda says, in the case of Chol HaMoed, what you can and can't do on Chol HaMoed, Isha lo tasub b'moed mipnei shenivul hula. So Rabbi Yehuda says a woman can't put seed on the holiday. This is on Chol HaMoed. This women would put stuff on them because it's nivul hula, because it doesn't look nice. You would put like a mask on your face and you walk around with it. It's like, it doesn't look nice, right? And it's a pain also, the whole thing. But if it's something you could take off on the moed, now why would women do this? To make their faces look better. You can do it if you could take it off, because in the end, right, it's all about what's in the end. Even though it's unpleasant for her right now, she's walking around looking disgusting, she's going to enjoy the benefits of it on the holiday, right, down the road. So wouldn't you say it's the exact same thing with the Gentile? Immediately they think, oh, this is not good for me. But then right away they realize, within a day, oh, this is actually beneficial because now I feel this burden off my shoulders. So Amram Nachman Bar Yitzchak Hanach Lilchot Moed Dekulu Meitzar Achshav Simcha La'achar Zman. Hilchot Moed in general, this great thing for people who cook and do all those things, right? When you cook and you bake, and some people love to do that, but many people, especially on a day-to-day basis, view it as a burden. Okay, now those things are all burdensome, and yet you're allowed to do them for the purposes of the holiday, because in the end, it gives you pleasure to eat good food. So all these things on the Moed are defined as that. They're work that you're doing that's hard work now, but you're benefiting from them on the holiday, and that's why they're permitted. But that's not the same for this Gentile who, and again, we also talked about before, maybe the Gentile doesn't think they're ever going to pay it back. So maybe they weren't feeling like it was such a big burden on their shoulders. Ravina, so now he says it's always unpleasant for the Ovei Kochavim. He gives a different answer, and that's really what I was saying a second ago, which is he says it doesn't have to do with the distinction moed and because moed specifically, that's the definition, and all those malachot are permitted because it's simcha. But it's always a disservice you're doing. This is how he explains Rabbi Yehuda for the Gentile by taking the loan back, because the Gentile really hoped that they would get out of paying it back and would never have to pay back the loan. Okay, so that's how we explain Rabbi Yehuda in light of what he said about the Moed Sugya. Now we're going to find out there's a third approach. Matnitin de lo Rabbi Shiur ben Korcha. With this, we'll finish for today. Titania, there's a bright that says Rabbi Shiur ben Korcha Omer. Milva b'shtar ein nifrei mehem, milva al pen nifrei mehem. Mipnei shu k'matzil miyadam. It really depends, and this kind of goes with Ravina, about was the Gentile really planning to pay back the loan or not? The Gentile wasn't planning to pay back the loan, then it really is tsar b'shvilo. right? It's a pain for him because he wasn't really planning to pay it back and he'll be upset. If the Gentile was planning to pay back the loan anyway, then it's a load light off his back. So it depends which kind of shtar, which kind of halva'ah. If it was a milveh b'shtar, if it was a loan that was written in a document, then for sure you'll have a way to always get it back. And then it's a lightening of the load. And that we're going to say is beneficial and that you can't do. But if it was Baal Peh, if it was an oral one, the Gentile probably hoped that they could get away with it because who's going to remember? Maybe the witnesses, won't be there to testify. The Gentiles hoping he won't need to return the money. And therefore, if you make him return it, it's actually definitely not beneficial to them. They're just upset about it. And that can be done 3 days before the holiday. Yativ Rav Yosef Acholei de Rabbi Abba. So this is a third opinion we didn't see in our Mishnah, which is it depends. Okay, what kind of shtar? So Rabbi Yosef was sitting behind Rabbi Abba. Yativ Rabbi Abba came to Rav Huna, and Rabbi Abba was sitting behind Rav Huna. Rav Huna was the rabbi of all of them. Yativ Kamar, and they sat and said, Hilchatak, Rav Huna sat and said, Hilchatak Rabbi Shua ben Korcha, the Hilchatak Rabbi Yehuda. You're going to see Hilchatak Rabbi Yoshua had Amaran. That's in our situation that we just said. It depends on which halva'ah. And Rabbi Yehuda is a totally different sugya in Baba. We learned it in Baba. It's in Baba Metzia. Ten Sabah. Yeah, it must be Baba Metzia. And I think it also came up in Baba Kama, but I think the Mishna is in Baba Metzia. Very famous one about Noten Semer Latzabah, Litzboa Lo Adom, Litzboa Shachor. He doesn't do what you wanted. We're going to start with that sugya tomorrow, and we'll see. It's total aside. It was just based on the statement of Rav Huna. We're going to hold like Rabbi Shimon Korcha on our issue and hold like Rabbi Yehuda on a different issue. But let's just review our daf. We started with the finishing up of this issue of the Ever Menachai, how that, the broken limb is something the Gentiles wouldn't bring, and that's learned out from Noach. Then we had to say, well, where do we learn treifa from? If we learn, doesn't that pasuk teach treifa? And then we said, no, treifa we learn from somewhere else. And we went into how we know also that Noach wasn't a treifa. Okay, then, and that was really from Itach bedomim lach. Okay, it had to be like Noach, who wasn't a treifa, and that's where we got treifa from, and also from l'chayot zera, according to some. And then we said, why do we need both? According to those who hold that l'chayot zera also is the treifa. Then we had the question of 3 questions. Shlosha yamim, does that include the holiday or not including the holiday? What's the reason for the prohibition? Is because of harvacha, that they're going to go thank their gods and lo yishama al picha, you're going to indirectly, or is it because lifnei iver, that you basically enabled someone else to sin, you helped them? Then we had, and then we just said, what's the nafkamina there? We didn't end up with an answer. What about if you did transgress this prohibition and you did business dealings with them? Are you allowed to benefit? And again, it wasn't clear in the end who we hold like. Then we had that story of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi who was going to accept this gift and didn't know how to accept it and how to deal with the kind of stuck in the middle. If I accept it, then I'm, basically going to cause him to go thank his God. And if I don't accept it, I'll create this hatred between them, which is raising all the complications of, these Jew-Gentile relations and how sensitive one needs to be. So Rish Lakish came up with a good creative way of how to do it. Then we went into all the cases in the Mishnah of the things you can't do and said, why does it go in both directions, right? And Abai each time said it's just Xera for the direction that's really problematic. And Rava said even in both directions, there's always some sort of benefit. And then we had to say, what's the chidush in each case in the Mishnah kind of builds on the other and adds some additional, just so you might have thought this, well, even this case, okay, is going to be forbidden. And then we got to Rabbi Yehuda and contradiction in Hilchot Moed, but we resolved that. And then this third opinion of Rabbi Shimon Korcha, who differentiated between a loan that's written and a loan that's oral. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good and a safe day.